Good morning, everyone. So, first of all, did you know that climate has changed and we now produce mangoes in Sicily? That is so cool. So for the last few years, I've been getting mangoes that come from my own country, and they are so good that I am going to make breakfast for Giacomo behind the camera using this wonderful mango. But that's not all I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you about the Etruscans today. Have you heard about the Etruscans? Have you ever heard this name? So maybe if you come to central Italy, you've heard this name before. They are a civilization that inhabited central Italy before the Romans. So let's get started. So, the Etruscans. The Etruscans are a civilization that inhabited central Italy between the 8th and the 3rd century BC. We're talking about Tuscany, Umbria. So Italy is divided in 20 regions, okay, just to give you an idea. Florence is in Tuscany, which is one of those regions. I say this because a lot of the time clients that tell me they want to come to Italy, they want to visit Florence, and then they want to go to Tuscany. And that makes me laugh because Florence is in Tuscany. But just a brief comment there. So, the Etruscans inhabited Umbria and Tuscany, and also part of, a lot of Lazio as well, which is the region where Rome is. So we're talking about all of central Italy. This was a civilization which was very influential upon the Romans. We always think of the Romans mostly being influenced by the Greeks, right? But they were actually very influenced by the Etruscans. However, you should also think of all of the Mediterranean as very globalized. So all of these populations which are inhabiting the Mediterranean during this period have a lot to do with each other and influence each other a lot. So for example, the ancient Greeks, the Etruscans, even the Egyptians were in continuous communication with one another, and they were commercing with one another and influencing each other's culture, all right? So when I say that the Romans were influenced by the Etruscans and the Greeks, they were also influencing each other, okay? So for example, we always think about the Romans having kind of taken their gods from the ancient Greeks. They took a lot of their deities also from the Etruscans, and the Etruscans' deities also were cross-influenced with the ancient Greek deities. So for example, Minerva, we always say, is the Roman version of Athena, but Minerva gets her name from Menvra, which is an ancient Etruscan goddess, okay? Now, there are some differences between Menvra and Athena, but they have a lot of things in common as well. But I'm getting beyond myself, as I often do. So the Etruscans start off as a civilization which we refer to as the Villanovians, okay? And there are various phases within Etruscan culture. And throughout these various phases, we recognize them as being more or less influenced by the Greeks and other civilizations. Now, the Etruscans were a very mysterious civilization. Still to this day, there's a lot of things we don't know about the Etruscans. And it's a fascinating subject matter because it's still, I like to say, it gives so much, right? Because we are still learning so much about them as we go. Even in my lifetime, there have been some very big discoveries made in Etruscology, which have changed the way we think about them, okay? They are mysterious also because we haven't entirely translated their language. So their alphabet is an alphabet that is borrowed a little bit from the ancient Greek alphabet. So there are some elements in common, and we have translated the letters of the alphabet. So we know each letter, what it's supposed to sound like. However, we haven't entirely translated the language. What does that mean? Now, first of all, you have to think that the invention of writing has only been made a few times in history, okay? So it's a very rare invention for someone to really just come up with the idea of putting down in writing one's language. Okay, most alphabets, most forms of writing are like second-hand inventions. So they're not inventions, they were borrowed, or the idea was taken from another civilization, which was a neighboring civilization. Sometimes that can look like literally just taking the idea and copying it. And sometimes that can look like hearing about the idea and then putting it into practice. Okay. However, the main point I'm trying to make here is that you can have two languages that have nothing to do with each other when it comes to the talking. And then when it comes to putting down one language into writing, we take the idea from the neighboring civilization of putting it down into writing. And so the writing can be similar, but the languages can be very, very different. And that's what's happening here. So the Etruscan language is very, very different from its neighbors and from the other civilizations it's kind of communicating with. But when it comes down, when they have the idea of putting it down into writing, they take the idea from the neighbors. And so the writing can be very similar whilst the language is very different. Do you get what I mean? I hope so. So the Etruscan language, we have translated the alphabet. We have not translated a lot of the language, so we don't know what a lot of it means. In this sense, we've had a lot of very big discoveries made in the past decades. So, for example, a very important piece of writing has been this contract which was discovered, which was the Tabula Cortonensis, where we find a lot of words which were not known before, which were words which are to do with commerce, because a lot of the literature that we have from Etruscan times is concerning religion, because they were very, very spiritual people, and we don't have a lot of words of everyday use. So discovering this contract, which was for the sale of an olive grove on the shores of the Lake Trasimeno, has made us make a lot of progress in the knowledge of the Etruscan language. However, it remains very, very mysterious. Now, as I said, the Etruscans were a very, very spiritual people. And we know this because of the relics that they have left, but also because of the descriptions that other contemporaries of other civilizations have made of what has been said about them, basically. So the ancient Greeks, for example, you know that they were always in other people's business and always telling us what they thought about other people's civilizations. And what they had to say about the Etruscans was that they were very, very religious. And also the Romans said this as well. Apparently, the Etruscans were very, very good at foretelling the future. They had a specific kind of priest, which was called an augur, which would foretell the future. And apparently the Romans would not go to war without consulting an Etruscan augur. By the way, the Etruscan civilization kind of comes to an end with the launch of the Roman civilization, but it's not like one exactly conquers the other. In certain cases, like certain cities of the Etruscans were taken over by the Romans, but in certain cases we have an assimilation, a slow assimilation. The first 7 kings of Rome were actually of an Etruscan family. So we do have an assimilation of the Etruscan culture into the Roman culture. And apparently at the beginning, the Romans would not go to war, like I said, without consulting an Etruscan augur. So you can really see how there is an overlap between these civilizations. How did they foretell the future, you may ask? Again, this is a very important part of their culture. They did this in various ways. One way was by looking at thunder. One way was by looking at the flight of birds, for example. Another way was a slightly more invasive way of foretelling the future, which is by looking at the intestines and very often the liver of sacrificed animals, okay? So they would sacrifice these animals on top of their altars, and then they would open them up and look at the livers. And for example, one of the relics that we found various versions of, which I find fascinating, is these bronze livers. So they're reproductions of the liver of an animal, which are made out of bronze, and then throughout all of this liver, you see various spots of the liver which are dedicated to different deities, which are written in Etruscan on there, okay? So it's a little bit like a cheat sheet for Etruscan augurs, which would use these when they were studying the livers, or when they were studying to become an augur, I don't know, to know like where to look for the part concerning the certain deity within the liver, the real liver that they were looking at. So, for example, Tinia is like the Etruscan version of Zeus, kind of like. So, if I'm inventing now, but let's say there's a swelling in the liver here in the spot which is dedicated to Tinia, so there's going to be thunderstorms coming soon. I don't know. That's probably not how it worked, but just to give you an idea, okay? Now, very spiritual people. A lot of what we know is things that were found in tombs. So like the Egyptians, they slowly grow to be buried with a lot of the things that they would take with them to the next life. So they believed that they could go to the next life with the things that they were buried with. So basically we get to a point in which they were being buried with everything but the kitchen sink, okay, so that they could take it with them to the next life. Now, obviously slaves weren't buried like this, and very poor people weren't buried with all these things, but people of a certain strata of society would be buried with a lot of the things that they wanted to carry with them to the next life. So an important caste within the Etruscan civilization was the warrior caste. I'm putting a lot of this inside because this is rose hip powder, and I'm making a breakfast for Giacomo, who's looking a little bit peaky, and we're the change of season now, so I think we need to boost his immune system, because I certainly don't know how to make these videos by myself. And here we have some beetroot powder, which is going to make it look cool, and is also rich of all kinds of like really good minerals and iron and all this stuff like that. So we have a caste of the Etruscan society, which are the warriors, and they were quite important. And in fact, one of the characters of the kind of the Greek pantheon, which they borrow and they assimilate and which they love, is Hercules, because he's a great representative of that caste. But what I wanted to say is that you could totally recognize if it was a burial of a warrior because of the things he would be buried with. So, for example, these beautiful helmets, which are very reminiscent of Tartar helmets of much time later. And so a lot of the things that we'll find in Etruscan burials seem like they're very similar to Eastern, that seem to have an Eastern influence, okay? So, for example, these helmets, and a grater. So basically, a grater for grating cheese would be a typical thing to be found inside an Etruscan warrior's burial, because there was this typical drink which would be made by the warriors, which were kind of itinerant, who were like on the go. And I know it doesn't seem very good to us today, and in fact I won't make it for breakfast for Giacomo. It was wine with honey and grated cheese inside, so nice, rich in protein. Giacomo, you're always telling me that you need to add protein to your diet. Here you go. Maybe you should start adding, but you don't drink wine, so there you go. You can't have cheese and wine together. Another beautiful and very iconic kind of burial, which you would find in a typical burial place for Etruscans, would be a woman's burial. Okay, so first of all, you should know that one of the things that the Etruscans were known for throughout the Mediterranean, and that was mentioned by the Greeks when talking more than once when talking about the Etruscans, were their women. So apparently the average Etruscan woman was more powerful and had a higher place in society than their Greek counterpart, or than the Roman women would have later on, for example, or than the Egyptian counterpart. Etruscan women enjoyed a lot more independence than other Mediterranean women. And for example, they could pass on their surnames to their children. We found burials where the head of the family was very, very obviously a woman, okay? And they sat at symposiums. Symposiums is basically like a party, okay? In other civilizations, like with the Greek with the Greeks. If you were a woman and you were at a party, basically you had to be a high-end prostitute, basically, to be able to be participating in these situations. A good family woman, a good family daughter or wife would not be in these kind of situations, okay? Etruscan women went to parties. Of course they're going to go to a party. They're not going to miss out on what the other men were doing. I don't know, I'm pretty sure that we haven't found Etruscan women warriors. They weren't dumb enough to go to war, okay? But they definitely participated in a lot of things that other men participated in, okay? Now, another thing that was said about the Etruscan women was that they wore too much makeup. And this was said by the Greek men, of course. Apparently, they wore quite a bit of makeup, but they weren't only frowned upon by, the patriarchal Greek society. They were also viewed as being very beautiful and very good at taking care of their bodies. So, for example, we have one Greek writer which invites Greek women to learn from the Etruscan women and look at the ointments they use and look at their lovely skin. Why don't you learn from them in how to take care of your bodies? Because look at how well they take care of themselves. So apparently they were very, very good at with cosmetics and things like that. In fact, Etruscan women would be buried with these gorgeous toiletry sets with all kinds of containers for ointments, for things for their hair, for makeup. And in fact, we've had exhibitions where we've kind of tried to, exhibitions inside museums locally where I live in the past. We've had exhibitions where we've tried to recreate the makeup that the Etruscan women would use by analyzing the residue of the makeup found inside these gorgeous toiletry sets found inside Etruscan women's tombs. Another very typical thing for Etruscan women to be buried with would be an Etruscan mirror. And there's certain archaeological museums in Tuscany which are so full of these mirrors because there's tons and tons and tons of mirrors that have been found of this kind. They're bronze mirrors. They weren't made of glass. They were basically, on one side of the bronze mirror, there was a design, like an incision of a kind of design with deities or things like that. And on the other side, it would be polished and polished and polished until you could get the best reflection you can get out of bronze. Obviously, it wouldn't be like the mirrors we use today, but the closest that they could get using a bronze mirror at the time. Other things that were found in women's tombs were combs, beautiful combs, and jewelry. Now, the Etruscans, the area that the Etruscans inhabited was very, very rich in different kinds of metals that they were able to use for different things. And one of the metals was gold. So we have some beautiful, beautiful gold jewelry that has been found inside Etruscan burials. And this is one of the reasons why very early on these Etruscan tombs were pillaged to find these beautiful jewelry pieces, which the Etruscan tombs were renowned for. Funny is that the pottery, which today the Etruscans are so known for, was left behind because we gave in the past a very high value to ancient Roman pottery and Greek pottery, but the Etruscan pottery was seen as unimportant. So it was just discarded and left there whilst the gold was taken away. Today, however, the Etruscans are renowned for their very particular beautiful pottery, which is bucchero. Bucchero is this traditional Etruscan pottery which has a metallic kind of shine effect to it. It's black, and the interesting thing about it is that it's black through and through. So if you smash it, it'll be black on the inside as well. Now, the way that they were able to accomplish this dark metallic style pottery was by what's called oxidoreduction. Oxidoreduction is when you cook pottery in an environment which is lacking oxygen, okay? So the reason why terracotta is red or has that kind of terracotta color is because the metal, the iron inside the clay, when it's cooking in the presence of oxygen, so in air, that metal becomes red. Because as you know, iron becomes red in the presence of oxygen. That's why our blood is red, because the iron in there is in the presence of oxygen. And that is why rust is red. So if you want iron to stay black, you must cook the clay in absence of oxygen. So basically the Etruscans would make this big terracotta vase. Then inside the vase, they would put the pottery elements that they wanted to cook in oxidoreduction. So the ones that they wanted to turn black, uncooked. So they would place them in there. Then they would put a load of like leaves and hay and kind of flammable material inside. Then they would seal the pot from the outside, the big pot, which we put everything inside of. And then they would cook this big pot from the outside. It would heat up, heat up, heat up until finally the flammable material on the inside would start to burn, and it would burn up all the oxygen, all the air within the pot. And then the things inside would start to cook in absence of air. And then finally, when the cooking was done, they would break the pot and they would take out these objects which had been cooked in oxidoreduction, turning metal colored, okay? Why were they trying to do this? Because we know that they tried and tried until they were able to obtain this result. And this is funny because to us today, the pottery looks this beautiful kind of very kind of stylish dark black pottery. But what they were trying to do was something a little bit tacky if we think about it today. You know when you get like these plates which are supposed to look like they're china, but they're actually made of plastic? It was the kind of the same thing, because they were trying to get a cheap version of something looking like metal, because the metal containers were costing more, and so they were trying to get something that looked metal but that was cheaper to make. Okay, so whilst to us this pottery has this beautiful kind of antique feel to it and stylish feel to it, at the time it was basically trying to get something that looks like metal but was cheaper. And so I always think that maybe for the people of the time, it must have had a kind of a tacky feeling to it, because it was trying to make it look more expensive than it was, if you see what I mean. So going back to the Etruscans in general, so they were certainly known for their relationship with spirituality, and I know you're hungry. I'm getting to it. Keep your hair on, Giacomo, Jesus. So, getting back to the Etruscans as this very spiritual civilization, we know that they were known for practicing a lot of religious rituals, being very, very dedicated to their religion. Their religion was interesting because, as all the religions of the time of the Mediterranean, it was polytheistic. So they did believe in a load of different deities. Some of them had a lot in common with other deities from other neighboring civilizations, as we've said. But the difference between this religion and other religions of the time, other polytheistic religions of the time, is that this was a revealed religion. What do I mean? So usually polytheistic religions are religions which form over time and kind of change over time and make themselves up as they go along, kind of thing. So you'll have one deity which becomes popular in one town, and so another town gets to know that deity and adopts it too, or may not. In this sense, with the Etruscans, this religion is supposed to have been revealed by someone who kind of came along and told them how it's done, which is usually something more characteristic of monotheistic religions. So the big monotheistic religions of the Mediterranean, for example, boast the fact that someone came along and told them how to do it, right? This is supposed to be what has happened with the Etruscans. Now, obviously, most religions that boast the coming along of someone to tell them how it's done actually were created through time and developed through time and changed through time. And the same goes for the Etruscan religion. However, they believed firmly in the fact that someone had come along and told them all about how you worship gods and how you foretell the future and how it's all done, basically. So Taygete was a mythical young boy young child actually, who was found by a farmer who was plowing the land, and apparently this little child jumped out of the soil and he started basically a bit like a prophet, telling everyone about the gods and who they were and how to worship them and how to make them happy. Then there was a nymph who apparently told everyone how to foretell the future, told the augurs how to foretell the future. The Etruscans they didn't view themselves as a united state. They were divided into 12 city-states called Lucomoniae, and each with their own king. And this is one of the reasons why we don't have one way in which they get assimilated by the Romans. So some cities were conquered, some cities were assimilated in a more peaceful way, but slowly we start to see the end of the Etruscan civilization by the 2nd century BC, and we see them getting assimilated into the Romans. If you guys are interested in the Etruscans, if you like this civilization, by the way, if any of you are watching from the US, there is a lot of interest coming from the US into the Etruscans. And in fact, a lot of Etruscology universities are in the US, and a lot of money, a lot of funding into research into the Etruscans have come from the US. So if you're interested in learning more about this civilization and you want to go more into depth, I can make more videos about it. Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe. Yes, I am threatening you. And let me know what you think about this and if you'd like to know more. I'm gonna serve up breakfast to our Giacomo, who is become too thin in my opinion, and I will go back to everything else I need to do. Have a great day. Bye.